Hello everybody, Ben Woodruff here with another falconry video. Today's video is my first video, there'll be more, on how to properly train an imprint. Very important subject. Getting into this before I start, if you haven't already, if you could please hit subscribe to help me keep this channel up and going. This subject, a lot of you have requested. I've trained a lot of imprints, and I'm training a new one right now, so it seems an appropriate time to do this. But let's talk about this first. What an imprint even is, first of all, and we're going to talk about some basics of how to raise them, how to feed them, and the differences between falcons versus hawks and eagles. Falconry, in most parts of the world, evolved from training a passage bird. A passage bird is a bird that has hatched, has been raised by mom and dad, has left the nest full-sized, but does not have adult colors yet, and maybe it's migrating, it's passing through. It has some skills, it knows how to fly, it has some hunting skills, but it's somewhat of a blank canvas with some wild skills. You train it, you trap it, you train it, and in the old days maybe only fly it a season and then you set it free in the spring. That's a passage bird. An imprint is when you take a baby, a little fluff ball. Could be different ages. Now that in today's world could be a captive bred bird, like this one I'm training is a yark, which is a 7/8 black gyr crossed with 1/8 saker. I'll explain that more. Basically, it's a black gyr falcon in thinking and size. Captive bred from a breeder, David Skinner, who breeds these wonderful birds. And there's also, you might pull a bird from the wild and train it from a baby and imprint it. Now, imprinting, you are the feeder. You're the parent now. You're the one bringing food. And so the mentality of the bird, it's literally a blank canvas. What does it see? Suddenly it's you instead of mom and dad. If you imprint them incorrectly, they can be very vocal, they can become very aggressive, and I want you to understand why that is. But why imprint anyways? Why not just fly a passage bird? I know people who only want to fly a passage bird. I know people who, if it's a captive bred bird, they want it to be parent raised completely, fully fledged, but raised by their parents in captivity, and then they take it as wild spaz and hone those skills. I've done all of the above. I've done just about every form I can imagine of raising. I do like imprints, especially with my falcons, because you can just train them to do anything. I love the calmness, the socialness, the social nature, the trust you can build, and they can be so fun-loving, which seems weird when you're training a bird to hunt. But I love imprints done properly. So imprinting, let's take a step back from falconry, and we need to understand in the wild what's going on here. Babies hatch, and you got a clutch of eggs, baby hatches. Next day, next baby, next baby, next baby. It's a conveyor belt of age. The older birds are going to be more with it earlier on, and there's competition for food. Now, mom and dad are armed with beak and feet, talons, right? You catch food, you carry food to the nest, you're holding it down, you're breaking off a piece. Eat this, eat this. That's what you're doing. That is kind of limited as far as we have more options is with our hands and our ability to walk and do things. We've got more options in the training regime than parents do. But parents, there's aggression. We do not want aggression, we say. But if you watch my videos, you know that's actually not true. We do want aggression in our birds. You can't get rid of aggression. You can properly direct it to where it belongs. Birds of prey are wired and built to have aggression, and that needs to be directed towards prey. Not towards other birds, not towards your face, not towards your dog. If they're trained properly, raised properly, the aggression is directed towards prey, so you get dinner. That's the whole point of a wild predator, of where that aggression comes in. Well, in the nest is when that aggression starts to manifest. At first, you're trying to outcompete with your siblings. You get a little older, mom and dad are bringing food to the nest, and they tear it apart and give it to you, but you start to stand on the edge of the nest, and you're meh, meh, meh. I see mom coming towards me, meh, meh. You start screaming, and then you rush towards the nest, try to outcompete with your siblings, and you might even grab the food that mom and dad get. That starts to turn into aggression towards mom and dad. As you begin to become what's called a brancher, you're climbing around the nest, climbing around the tree, climbing around the cliff face, and you even start to fly towards mom and dad. At that stage, most raptors will start to, instead of killing prey, they will maim prey, injure it, and fly to the nest. And when the babies start flying, they drop it, and the baby's like, oh, and they dive towards the prey. So mom and dad are saying, don't you dare look at me to kill me. You need to take that murderous intent and direct it towards the visual image of prey falling down. And they start to, okay? Get another week or two of that, and mom and dad are gone. They get out of Dodge. They're nowhere to be seen. The baby's like, meh, meh, meh. Where'd you go? Suddenly, vocalizing does nothing. Mom and dad never show up again. And aggression towards mom and dad is non-existent because mom and dad don't exist. And the only other thing you've ever directed aggression towards is a prey visual. And suddenly you start to wander, leave the nest, leave the nest region, and you start to hunt on your own. Or you die. That's what happens in nature. Here's the problem. If you're a falconer and you're raising an imprint, if you are mom and dad, you never leave. The intent is to stay together. So any aggression that can start to naturally happen towards mom or dad, which is your face, you got a problem. So if you do this wrong, you are in trouble. This is why, for example, in the United States with our laws, you start off as an apprentice, then a general, then a master falconer, and an apprentice is not allowed to train an imprint because the idea is you probably ought to have more experience with other, passage raptors so you understand more basics and have some more teaching before you take on an imprint. Because you don't want to have what we call a misprint or a food imprint, which is a bird that only views you as a deliverer of food. But first, before even that, let's talk about food. Mom and dad pin down food with their beak, break off a piece, here you go, break off a piece, here you go, break off a piece, here you go. These birds grow insanely fast. Now, and they grow in spurts. They grow size, down, start to get feathers in, then grow their body and skeleton a little more, then the feathers start coming in. You get to the point where the feathers are growing in like half an inch every 5 hours. They're growing fast. That you need to provide good food, good nutrition. So I usually do Coturnic quail captive bred that I buy frozen, Japanese quail, right? And I also supplement with Vitahawk. Now, I want this bird to get all of that nutrition, not just here's some meat. I mean, you need bone, you need everything. What I do is, here's a section of quail leg, for example, and I've got some good game shears, like scissors, and what I'm going to do is, you've got the femur and the tibia here underneath. This is too big of a piece for a bird. Bird's going to choke on it. So I'm going to take the scissors and carefully poke in and snip and cut up the bone into tiny little pieces while the leg is still in one piece. And then once I've done that, I'm going to cut that leg into, 3 or 4 pieces, and I'm going to get them a little bit wet with water. That's always good. Water's part of the building blocks of life. Put it in a little bowl and put some Vitahawk in, which is a very good vitamin and nutrition supplement to add even more nutrition to this growing baby. Mix that up, okay? So that is kind of your approach. You can do that with the whole bird if you want. Now, when it comes to the viscera, the guts, the lower intestines, some people are a little more cautious depending on who the breeder is of those. You might be like, that might not be as clean. So maybe you're not feeding the lower intestines. Maybe you are. That's personal preference. I'm not getting into that here. I'm just saying personal preference. Talk to your sponsor on that one. But this when you're going to go feed your bird, let's divide falcons from the rest, okay? Falcons versus hawks or eagles. So falcons, their wiring is not as aggressive normally if you're raising an imprint. You're more likely to get a bird that's screaming a lot. It's very common even if you properly train them. But remember, the mentality is less aggression driven in a falcon, and most people are flying a falcon when you're training them to circle above. So even a falcon that's being kind of obnoxiously vocal once they're flying, they're probably not going to be vocalizing while they're doing the athletic performance of circling up thousands of feet. They kind of kick the habit if you're flying them often. But still, the same principles apply that I'm going to teach you about. With hawks, eagles, whether it's captive bred eagle of some kind, an accipiter, a parabudio, a boodio, like a red tail, a Harris hawk, any of them. All of those, my personal preference is to have the parents raise them. I would prefer a passage or a Foley parent raised before I take them on. Usually any of those categories, the only reason I do take an imprint is if it might be hard to find one otherwise. So like, let's say, hey, I don't know if I'm going to be able to track down and trap a passage goshawk, so I'm going to pull an IS and imprint it just to ensure that I get one for the season. Where a falcon, totally different. Any falcon species, I love imprints. I prefer them because personal preference. Again, I have many friends who prefer parent raised, have them wild and spastic and calm them down, or a passage, fine. Me personally, I love the fun and the personality of a properly imprinted falcon. How goofy and fun-loving and enjoyable they are to be around when you're not flying, and yet when you fly them, they're still roar, mighty and powerful predator. Mighty game hawk, but yet they're just such a joy to be around when you're not flying them. And again, there's different ways of thinking. I'm just sharing my personal preferences and principles that work. Remember, there's a million ways to practice falconry, and there's opposing views from what I'm saying, and that is fine. It's totally fine. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about how to prep the food, cut up bones into tiny, tiny pieces within the meat, use some Vita-Hawk. Let's get these birds fed, keep them happy. Okay, so now when it comes to food, remember, you're a parent and you don't want to be associated with food. But how do you feed them? You get a new bird. It's brand new. Me personally, I usually do what you shouldn't do long term, which is I like to feed them by hand at first, just to make sure they're eating. Some people are like, no, even from day one, you shouldn't do this. But I give a day, maybe 2 days of doing this before I transition to the other way that I'll get into in a second. So starting off, I got these pieces of meat that have had some water and had some Vita-Hawk, and I just handed to them. I'm like, here you go. Have this piece of meat and let them. And at first they're like, a human, you're not a falcon. But they're like, oh, food, okay. And so they're kind of acclimating to your presence, acclimating to your hand, being by their face, which, in my opinion, is a preliminary hood training, getting used to, hey, hand's going to be putting equipment on, you might put a transmitter on. So that's good to get them a little used to you. So that's the first principle there is, hey, here's some food. You eat it, you're good. You're feeding them up, you don't want to feed them too much, but you want to keep them full. You see that crop being full. But then the next step is you want to transition on how food appears. Now, mom and dad, babies when they hatch are basically blind, but they hear or feel mom and dad show up, and they just know food's above. So what you do, flip the bird around, it's not facing you, take a stick, take a bamboo shish kebab skewer, and dangle food above them, and they're like, oh, that's where food is supposed to appear. And that's normal. And they'll just eat that, and it works good. Here's the thing. Baby birds in the nest, ISs, they want mom and dad to feed them as long as possible because they're wobbly, and they don't yet know how to break apart pieces of food. You are a human. You have fingers and a thumb. You have tools like game shears. Remember the scissors, okay? You can cut it up for them so we can speed up their training regime. So here's what I'm getting at. They're like, Mom, I'm going to push my siblings away. Give me attention. Feed me. Break apart a piece of meat. You already broke apart the meat. So you can really quickly with that stick be like, oh, it's above. Then put it lower. Then put it lower until you're putting it literally in their nest on a little plate, for example. And so now they are self-feeding at an age much younger than they would be self-feeding in the nest with mom and dad. So you've sped up their thinking, and you have taken their thinking away from aggression. Mom and dad feed me. You have taken that away from your face and put it down below earlier than it would have occurred in the wild. This is a good principle. Now, what are we going to do with that? Well, you can bring them a plate of food. You can bring an object that you want associated with food. For me, that's a lure. Flying a bird to a lure, stooping them and having them dive and dive and dive to a lure is fun. It's athletic. It's good exercise. It's great for demonstrations. I do it, but I don't do it much anymore. I have come to prefer my lure to be my Hail Mary pass to guaranteed get my bird back. I want the lure to be the utmost important, huge meal no matter what. If the lure comes out and you come to it, you guarantee get a giant meal. And I do that because you've got a lot of eagles in my area. And so if you're flying your falcon and an eagle appears and your dumb falcon doesn't see it, you're like, bring out the lure, get that bird to come. I don't want that bird thinking, do I want to come to the lure or do I want to keep flying until I want the lure to be a safer reward even than a kill. And I know it's a little backwards from some people do. But so anyways, my point is, okay, I might have that lure in there with the bird so they're used to seeing it. And I might be like, hey, here, I brought it. It's got your meal on it. Eat off the lure. Good principle, but I've still been a parent bringing the food item. So that bird is still going to food imprint on me. This is not good with falcons. This is a death guarantee out to your face if you're doing that with hawks and eagles, because you are still bringing the prey, okay? And maybe you're not feeding it to them, but this visual is still bringing it. So what you want to do, you can do this with falcons, you definitely want to do this with hawks or eagles, is you want to bring them to the food instead of bringing food to them. So for example, you got your goshawk in this little nest, and you're like, okay, in another room, I'm going to have a plate with food on, or I'm going to have a lure with food on, or I'm going to have a carcass of a prey, a dead jackrabbit, a dead pheasant, a dead grouse with food on top. So they see that visual image that I want them to associate with hunting, and there's food on. And you, oh, hi, I'm chilling with you. Oh, now I'm picking not the bird up. You want to, I got to say too, you want to pick up your bird as little as possible. You want to have some sort of a nest that works. You carry the nest. You bring it to the other room, plop them in front of it, and they're like, oh, they're looking away from you. They're not seeing you, and they're seeing food. And they're, okay, I'm going to eat this food that I was moved to. Wild birds can't do that. A mom and dad doesn't pick up a baby and take them to dinner. They're always bringing dinner to them. But remember, you're not going to disappear. You're going to stay in this bird's life. So it is vital that you disassociate with food at this age bracket, especially with any form of hawk or eagle. It's good with falcons, but especially with hawks or eagles of any kind. Okay. So this is the first stages of principles that I've been talking about. This is the first stuff you kind of need to know about, okay, food and feeding and just kind of some of the basics. But I've left out the most important part, socialization. Okay, you want a social imprint. You do not want your bird to associate you excessively with food. So everything I told you some principles of how to avoid them, but you're still in their life. You're still associated with food. You need to give as much time as you can spent with that bird without food. You plop that bird next to you on the couch and be like, hey, we're watching TV together. We're watching some documentaries. We're just chilling for hours. If you can bring your bird to work, bring your bird to work. A lot of places won't allow that. But if you can explain, hey, this is baby, it's very important. It's a brief window. It won't be all the time. My job, I'm a professional wildlife educator at Evermore Park. So I bring in animals to work anyways. But if I got a bird that I want to train, even if it's, not a teaching bird, in between programs, I can be like, hey, I work at a fantasy theme park. I've got elves and goblins and fairies and knights walking by in armor and big ears and wings and costumes. And the bird's just like, whoa, it's getting all of this exposure. You want the bird to be solid. You want it to be, I'm not afraid of a dog. I'm not afraid of a car. I'm not afraid of a dragon. These are just things that my whole time in my little artificial nest went walking by and I got to see. You want people to come by and see. Some birds, talk to your sponsor. You let people pet them, not on the head, but hey, get them used to touch, especially the feet. Oh, because remember, you're going to be putting jesses, bells, transmitters on, off, leashes on, off, swivel on, off. You want the feet, touching the feet to be totally normal. Nobody touches a foot in a bird's nest in the wild. Mom doesn't touch the feet. You don't touch your own feet. Babies don't touch each other's feet. That's not normal. It needs to become normal. They learn it very fast, but get them used to sounds, loud sounds, music. Just spend constant time with that bird. It's only a matter of weeks that you're raising an imprint. Dedicate all the time you can to spending with them and making them social. Now there's Now, especially with a falcon, I just put tarps all over my house. It's like, guess what? You live in my front room. We're watching TV. I just get a bunch of old blankets and old clothes I'm going to get rid of, and tarps all over everything. And you can walk all over everything, poop all over everything. Doesn't matter. You're social, and I'm taking you with me everywhere. But there's other tricks you can add to that socialness. Maybe you got two birds and you're raising them together. Okay, there are people, I haven't done this, but there are people who have a kitten or a puppy, or not a puppy, but an adult dog or a kitten. And at the right age, some birds, you can have them snuggle together. And that really helps. Again, you have to know the dog, you have to know the kitten, because obviously that could be tragedy. I've never heard of it going wrong, because the kind of people who do it are people who know their animals very well and know their age as well, and they watch it very closely. And it can go incredibly well. Another trick that anybody can do, but it works especially well for those flying accipiters. You're flying a goshawk, a sparrowhawk, Cooper's hawk, sharp-shinned hawk, something like that. Is, remember, they're still going to associate you every day, and they can still imprint somewhat as a parent figure. And so maybe you get a goshawk, your buddy gets a goshawk, and you raise them according to all these different principles and tricks I kind of mentioned. But at the right age, you swap them. Now, of course, you need to know the laws of your country and make sure that your paperwork is in place to legally and properly do that. But in America, you can do that. You just have to write it up correctly. But that can be very good, because you're raising them properly, and then right at the age that their feathers are fully coming in and they're starting to fly, you swap them, and suddenly they're like, I know humans, but you're not the human that I might have associated with food. You're a new human. It's perfect. It can work so well if you and a buddy are both flying accipiters. And again, you can do that with any bird of prey, but it's an especially good trick to use with accipiters. So all of these little tricks and techniques are very basic, and they're entry level of, hey, I've got a new imprint and I'm trying to train. But again, the two principles are disassociate yourself with food at an earlier age than they would in the wild. Get them self-feeding and feeding off of either a carcass or a lure. Perhaps take them to food instead of food to them, and socialize. Acclimate them to anything, everything, strange things. Just get them rock solid. Put them, my spiral and stomp thing. Yeah, put the nest on the ground and get used to walking over them, people walking around them. Then put them up high. You're on the couch with me watching a falconry documentary. No, you're back on the ground. I'm walking all around you, and you're just used to it. Get them rock solid. All these techniques are going to benefit you once you're hunting in the wild. I will do other videos showing the progress of a yark and seeing how she grows. And again, it's such an amazing time, because literally that age where the feathers start coming in, you could almost do a time lapse. It's like every 5 hours, your feathers are growing ½ an inch. It's incredible how fast they grow. So I'll do more updates and show more techniques in the process. But I hope you found this video useful. Feel free in the comments to ask any questions or share your personal experiences. And as always, happy hawking.